So let me explain the dilemma here. Um, I'm I'm by myself, and I don't know how to manipulate media, and so I am broadcasting on my Facebook page. I am broadcasting on Ken Goldberg's Law and Disorder Facebook page, and I am broadcasting on Ken Goldberg's YouTube channel, Ken Goldberg's Law and Disorder. And you'll see there's an empty seat, although it is occupied by Amy Jo's headset and Buddha. They're sitting in tonight, help out with the show. What a cluster effing. But let's just get to it. God. So it is Tuesday, 6 p.m. Normally, if I'm not available, we don't do the show because it's my living room. What happens when AJ can't be here? Well, I found out if AJ is not here, I go solo, and she probably won't even listen to the show. So, did I say so more than too many times? Too many times. So, I need to turn my phone off. Huh? I got a text from AJ. Sort of is. Anybody want to tell me what that means? All right. So, I'm going to start off with some news and then a ramble. I keep looking down at the computer, but the camera's up there. See, again, this is media challenging. In fact, I wanted to do a tour of the living room later with my camera. I'm afraid if I do it, I'll lose everything, but I think I'm going to risk it anyways because I have to fill in all the airspace in the absence of AJ, co-counsel, helping me out. Although I do appreciate that Nick has offered to sit in from time to time, I think we should have him on as a guest. Okay. Of relevance to all Texas residents and motorcyclists, especially one percenters, I have my first news report ready to go. An appellate court in the federal court has ruled that a jury in Waco, Texas, which I believe is in Waco. Anyways, doesn't matter. Here's the issue. A jury found a bunch of Mongols motorcycle club guilty of various crimes. Attendant to that verdict, they also ruled that they could be stripped of their logo, which they've had since 1969. The government argued that the reason you can confiscate their logo is that it's a criminal operation. It's a way of profiting, and they shouldn't be able to do that. And the jury agreed with them. And so the government announced, we're prohibiting them from wearing it. It's no longer their property. It went up to the federal court in Santa Ana, Los Angeles. Okay, so they did this in Los Angeles. I thought maybe that was the Banditos. So I thought it was the Banditos. Banditos are Texas. Anyways, it doesn't matter. It's all about liberty versus crime. That's really the issue. So I was wrong about Texas. Scratch Texas. So an interesting verdict. The judge in the federal court ruled that the government had overreached. They could not strip the logo from this club, and that they just didn't have, it was not a right within, it's not in their toolbox. Can't do it. I thought intangible, the judge recognized that although intangible property may be the subject of a seizure or forfeiture, a trademark, particularly a collective membership mark, is a unique type of property tied both to actual use and the goodwill it symbolizes that just doesn't fit in this particular circumstances with the remedy that the government seeks. In other words, you have some people that are criminals, that's fine. You cannot collectively nail the entire club on the basis of these convictions. You didn't convict them all. So I don't know, would there be a percentage at which a judge would say, 50% of the club has been convicted now. So you can strip them. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. And it was reminiscent of the banditos in Texas who were arrested in Waco after the shootout, which may or may not have been initiated by police officers. Um, Over almost 200 individuals were rounded up, held $1 million bail. It was such an overreach on the part of the local prosecutors and the local police in Waco. Most of those cases, I believe, have been dismissed. There was some pleas. It was a horrible situation. But what was really bad about the whole situation is, first off, the Banditos were there, and then there was another club, and there were other clubs. There's a bunch of clubs coming together. A lot of people were coming for the meeting. They weren't coming for the rumble in the jungle in Waco. But that didn't stop the Waco County prosecutor from screwing everybody. And I mean that sincerely, screwing everybody. Hey, Harold, Pam, Ray Dean, Joe, Jesse, if you're still there, that's cool. So I'm wearing this shirt. I said it in the promo. I want to explain this shirt. George gave me this shirt Sunday, just handed it to me as I was coming out of a meeting and said, "This will fit you." Oh, okay. I couldn't really tell what it would look like, whether he was wearing one, but I really hadn't paid much attention. I got home, I put it on, I thought, "Hey, that's pretty attractive." I will caveat, I couldn't get my head through the opening. It's a small opening. So I put it on, took a selfie, put it online because I thought, it's looking sharp. And I got more likes, more reactions than I've gotten to anything other than posting pictures of my kids. Why is a shirt more popular than I have ever been? I don't know, but I accept it with grace. And so I thought, I got to do something. AJ's not here to make me look good, because that's kind of part of the job of working with each other, is to make each other look good. I thought, what can I do to help me look good? The shirt. So I'm wearing the shirt, could be warm, doesn't matter. All right, more about police conduct or government conduct. In Alabama, a man who shot and killed a police officer, 1985, and he's been sitting in prison, and he received the death penalty. And there's been all types of proceedings since 1985. He was convicted in 1998. There were several mistrials. Man, that bothers me, because one mistrial, I get that. Two mistrials, you need to wonder what's going on. It's not usually the defense, because they don't like to give the defense an opportunity to mistry something. So I don't know exactly how many mistrials. I'm just reading the article. Anyways, and there's a legal process called habeas corpus, which somehow technically means bring the body before the court, essentially. But it's when you're trying to get the court's attention. So the Supreme Court is involved in this because the Supreme Court has previously ruled that there are circumstances where even if a jury finds you guilty and sentences you to death, the government may not proceed with the execution, specifically people who are retarded or insane. So we have something that's called guilty but insane. They go to institutions. They may not be executed. And then you have people who are found guilty. They may have said they were insane, but didn't meet the legal standard. So later on, when it comes time to execution, it has been successfully argued on a number of occasions that if you are incapable of understanding the nature of your execution, you cannot be executed. And the two categories that people fall into are crazy people and people whose intellect is below retardation, what we used to call retardation, still call it. So I believe the threshold is somewhere around 60 IQ. So, and that one of the ways that came about actually is Governor Perry of Texas tried to execute somebody who was really slow, really low IQ. What he did was the Texas legislature years ago passed a bill that said we would not execute retarded people. And Governor Perry vetoed it. Why? Well, I guess he likes Texas' reputation for executing more persons per year than all the other states combined. 49 other states combined, whatever executions are taking place, Texas beats them combined. Now, some states don't even have the death penalty anymore, so it's not maybe as grandiose as it sounds. It's significant. So, anyways, the Supreme Court had to step in and tell Texas, no, we've said it before, we're saying it again. You cannot execute somebody who is retarded to the point where they don't understand the nature of the punishment. It's also been ruled that, well, I don't remember the ruling, but here was a case in Louisiana where they administered drugs to a crazy person to make him sane enough to understand they were going to kill him. The court and the government all agreed that the guy's mental status was such that he was too crazy to understand what was going on. But the government said, listen, we can shoot him up with this, with various antipsychotic drugs. We'll make him sane and then we'll execute him. Interesting argument. Now, in this case, Vernon Madison of Alabama, I don't know that it's ever been disputed. It doesn't matter. Let's assume for our purposes, he murdered a police officer and that in 1998, he was convicted. Well, since then, I'm going to read this because I can't follow it all. His health has collapsed. After a series of strokes, he is now unable to walk, is incontinent, and legally blind. He cannot recite the alphabet or rephrase a simple sentence. And legally, he can no longer remember the crime he committed. So lawyers said, this is kind of like insanity or retardation. You should not be able to execute somebody who, because of health reasons, is no longer plugged in. For all practical purposes, I would say he's insane. But anyways, Supreme Court. And so the argument, by the way, is the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. Didn't work. Kagan wrote the opinion and said that what matters is whether the prisoner has a rational understanding of what is happening to him and why, not whether he has any particular memory or any particular mental illness. Got me. I don't know. I don't get it. Let's see what Joe had to say. He wrote something. There is a murder defense unique to Texas that substantially reduces the number of convictions. It's the he needed killing defense. Cute. Kind of like stand your ground. I've always argued the he needed killing defense, by the way, when I started teaching firearms back in, man, I guess right around 2000, when I was teaching people firearms, people would ask me, well, when can you shoot somebody? Do they have to have a weapon? And we talked about this with AJ a couple weeks ago. And here's what I said in general. All you have to be concerned about is do you believe a jury will believe that you were reasonable in thinking that you were at risk of receiving great bodily harm or death at the hands of whoever it was? So if you're a woman, I think that opens up kind of globally who you can shoot. Personal opinion. If you're a guy, it's not as global, but there's still a lot of room for discussion. And this he needed killing thing is absolutely the line that I use. So it's funny that Joe used that. And here's what I mean. And we talked about it. Somebody's coming in a threatening manner at you. I've been there. And you tell them not to come at you. I used to say, hold up your hand. It's a physical gesture. So that anybody nearby can see, everybody knows what this means. Even in German, even if you speak only German or Dutch, this means stop, okay? So your hand gesture, you yell, stop, stay back. They keep coming. If there's time, you may not have access to a weapon. Your weapon should be in a holster, by the way. You place your hand on your weapon. Perhaps you draw the weapon to what's called the low ready position. From the low ready position, you again announce. So the low ready position looks something like that. You announce it, you keep yelling, stay back, right? If there's people within hearing distance, they should hear you. The person keeps coming. They're mad. I don't care whether they're armed or not. The important thing is they're not dissuaded by this firearm exhibited in the low ready position. I lift the firearm, I yell again, stop or I'll shoot. They come, I discharge my firearm, I terminate the threat. I do nothing more than stop the threat. We've talked about that on the show. You do not shoot to kill, you shoot to stop. Where does the line he needed killing come in? I want, when the jury is deliberating, I want to put on this case for my defendant. I want the jury to say to themselves, not whether the shooter was right to shoot. I want them to go back and say, that guy needed killing. Because who's going to run up on somebody who's yelling at him, stay away from me, I've got a gun, points the gun, keeps yelling, and eventually gets shot. And you got witnesses. The jury's going to go back and say, that's crazy. A normal person would have backed away. This guy didn't back away. He needed killing. So, all right. Hey, David. Good to see you, sir. So, next one. Speaking of shooting, oh, how timely. So there was a young man in Sacramento, California, who they said he was breaking windows in cars. Police said they chased him. They said he ran into a backyard. Turns out it was his grandparents' backyard. 22-year-old man. The police say that when they entered the backyard, he started coming towards them. And they shot him. They fired 20 rounds at him. I don't know how many times they hit him. Sort of isn't relevant. They killed him. So there's video showing him moving towards the officers. An officer said he believed he saw a muzzle flash. Well, he didn't. Everybody now knows that he had no gun. He had a cell phone in his hand, and they shot and killed him. The question was, is that an illegal homicide? So the district attorney of Sacramento County did something that's not unusual, issued an opinion. And as she has done in the last 34 police shootings, said there was no crime. There was no crime because the officers, although she says, everybody agrees there was no firearm, this guy had no firearm, everybody agrees that the officer reasonably believed he was in fear for his life. And so when he shot, he's legally justified. Now, so if a police officer can do that, don't you know that if I'm faced with somebody rushing at me, talking about, I'm going to kill you, I mean, it says it, right? I mean, well, I was going to say, who hasn't been in that position? Probably a lot of you. My second wife and I, we were in that situation. He didn't say, I'm going to kill you. He got out of his car and started coming at me, saying he was going to kick my ass. I cautioned him verbally. Then I used some gestures. I was more explicit about what I meant. And he said, if you didn't have a gun, I'd kick your ass. To which I replied something like, well, that's the point. I believed him. He probably would have kicked my ass if I didn't have a gun. So I don't care how big he was. He was obviously violent. I was not being violent. I really hadn't done anything to him. He was kind of drunk, I figured out later on. And so I did what I had to do. So back to this police shooting. And this is becoming a very common thing because we now have, in the old days, in the absence of video, this probably would have gotten swept under a long time ago, not 2 years ago. So this is 2 years later. Because they would have said, he had a gun, nobody would have known any better. There was no video. In this case, there was video. I don't know what we do about these police shootings. On the one hand, I put myself in the position of a police officer. I'm working anywhere, and police officers are dying in higher numbers than usual. That should be kind of irrelevant. anyways, what do I have to do to be in the right? There certainly has to be a balancing test. On the other hand, ain't it awful that people who are not in possession of a firearm are being shot by police officers? And when I say not in possession of a firearm, they're not in possession of a weapon. I was working on a case in Chicago where a police officer shot a guy whose family I was helping represent, along with a lawyer in Chicago. The case is still going on. The facts were that this police officer fired his Glock, 45 caliber Glock. He emptied it, 12 rounds or so, and he only struck this young man one time, south side of Chicago, young black man, young black officer. Well, I don't know if he's young black. He hit the deceased one time in the back. He said that the young man pointed a gun at him. The boy's cell phone was recovered where the police officer said he was pointing a gun at him. And he swears there was a gun, and the boy ran about a quarter of a block and fell and died. Police officer came along shortly thereafter chasing, but there was a lapse from the time he was shooting. So he's shot. By the way, I looked at the bullet holes, what I could find. Man, the guy was spraying and praying. Not very talented shooter, but he got this young man in the back, and it's a bad deal. So I said there's a balancing test. So when will the officer be justified in fearing for their life and resorting to deadly force versus when should people be free of being murdered or shot by police officers when they don't pose a genuine threat? Anybody can use self-defense as a defense. You can even raise unreasonable self-defense. In other words, the circumstances they appeared to me, while I may have been unreasonable, to me at the time, the perception was, I had that case too in Chicago where a client of mine, he thought, it was a young man, 19 years old, he thought the other kid was coming at him and was pulling out a gun. I happen to believe he was trying to pull out a gun, but that's a whole nother story. It doesn't really matter. He didn't have any witnesses for him, and the deceased had his buddies who said there was no gun. So my argument didn't fly. But having grown up in the streets and been involved in a lot of gang stuff and been involved in a few shootings, not as the shooter. In this case, the young man was coming towards the vehicle my client was in. He lifted his sweatshirt, reached down in his waistband, knowing that these were opposing gangs. I think it's reasonable to believe he's going to pull something out. His friend said he didn't do that. He just walked up and said hi. That didn't happen. I know that for a fact, but I'm not allowed to testify. All right. So I just think it's a rough thing to balance society's interest on, for the police officer and for people who are just going about their business. And sadly, those of us in the firearms industry, I'm not in it right now, but if David's still here, he was, training. You would be surprised how little training a police officer has. If I haven't mentioned it since I started this video cast a couple of weeks back, various studies show that police officers typically miss 73% of all their shots fired do not hit their intended target. Let's break that down. 73% of all the shots fired by police officers do not hit their intended target. Let's go back to this Chicago incident I just described where he fired 12 rounds, only struck one time. He hit garages, he hit doors, he hit nothing. Kind of dangerous because bullets tend to travel until they hit a solid object. And sometimes the solid object is innocent bystanders, which is why when gangs are shooting, we have so much carnage. If the gangs could hit their target, the death rate would go down, the killer rate would go down. incapable of hitting their target most of the time because they have no training. But I'm talking about police officers. Police officers qualify, some departments maybe qualify 4 times a year. And I know officers who have spent 30 years on the force and never discharged their firearm, except on the range. I've talked to range officers, and I can tell you that range officers can tell you unequivocally about the numerous times a police officer taking the test or shooting on the range, maybe practicing, accidentally, what they call an accidental discharge of the firearm, which means the gun went off when the officer didn't even intend for it to go off. Now, some call it a negligent discharge. In the business, trainers tend to call it negligent discharge because the firearm will not accidentally go off. Somebody has to have their finger on the trigger. So that makes it not quite an accident, more negligence. They have to keep a log every time a gun is discharged improperly. I will tell you what I have discussed on previous shows. When I was licensed to train and qualify security guards in the state of Texas with a firearm, I decided of my own accord, apparently wrongly, but that'll come at the end of this. They had to fire 50 rounds. They had to fire 10 shots at 3 yards, 10 shots at 7 yards, and 20 shots at 7 yards and 10 yards, 10 shots at 15 yards, 50 rounds, 20, 20, 10. I decided at some point, I used to qualify officers day and night because we were one of the few ranges that did it, that if you missed the target, the complete silhouette target, the silhouette target is about this big, okay? If you missed it at 3 yards, I flunked you. Even though mathematically you could still qualify with a score of, I think, 250 or whatever it is. It's been a long time. I figured if you couldn't hit a target at 3 yards, you didn't need to be licensed to carry a firearm. And I would flunk people, and they would have to come back at a later time and try again. I ended up getting brought down to Austin, Texas, to discuss with the board at that time, the private security board, some of our training. And I was talking to them and said, by the way, this is my policy. And they said, well, you can't do that. If he can mathematically pass it, you have to pass him. And this is in contrast to what, at the time anyways, because I was also a licensed concealed carry instructor, the state of Texas Department of Public Safety, a different board than the private security one, said, you can pretty much flunk somebody for almost any reason. If for some reason you think they shouldn't be carrying a gun, you can flunk them, not pass them, and let us decide. Let them come to us and say, hey, this guy should have passed me. And so I figured, the private security board, essentially kind of a law enforcement, they ought to have the same attitude. They said, no, we don't have that attitude. Now, these studies, so the last one was the RAND report, a RAND think tank, pretty conservative think tank. They studied New York police officers, and they said that if the officer was not being shot at, his hit ratio went up. 73% was when he thought he was in being shot at. His hit ratio could be 30%, not exactly great, if he wasn't being shot at. I don't have the numbers cemented in my head. And here was the case that just was for the ages. Amadou Diallo, who they said they thought was a burglar. They approached him for tactical officers. Tactical officers in the city of New York receive additional firearms training above and beyond what a beat officer would get. And they fired 41 rounds at one guy who was not armed. He had some cassette tapes with him. 4 officers fired 41 rounds. They hit him 19 times. He was standing in the vestibule of an apartment building, which is essentially like shooting ducks in a barrel. Okay. They had all kinds of reasons why they missed. But can you imagine shooting a guy who's essentially maybe 20 feet in front of you and you miss over half your rounds? So I used to say, well, on the bright side is these guys hit better than 27% with 19 out of 41 rounds. They were popping almost 50%. They were able to finally terminate Amadou Diallo, an unarmed person that 4 officers shot at, and eventually, after hitting him 19 times and missing him, how many times? 20, 22, were able to do that. It says the training is inadequate for a number of reasons. We know if you're carrying a firearm, you may not know this. When you're shoot under stress, your what is it called? Small motor or something goes to hell. If David's still watching, he knows what terminology I'm trying to use. Maybe he'll type it in. Or if somebody else knows what the terminology is. Small motor skills. Thank you. So large motor skills, running, handling a firearm requires dexterity and stuff. Finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. So why did I go off on that tangent? Does anybody remember? See, this is why AJ needs to be here so she can square me out, huh? God, Lord have mercy. So I say that on the one hand, it's kind of clear that since the number of people of color getting shot by police officers and killed is far higher than white people being shot. Now, you can calculate in, the inner cities of the inner city of most major metropolitan areas are people of color. Chicago, LA, New Orleans, wherever you go. But it's not like there aren't poor white criminals too. I get, you're in Highland Park in Chicago, you're in Plano, Texas, or Highland Park, Texas. Maybe they're a little more hesitant to shoot and they're not in that kind of milieu all the time. But, there's guys operating in anywhere from the meth labs of Kentucky, uptown Chicago is the port of entry for Appalachian whites. Those are some top white boys, okay? They do not get shot with the same. The studies, it's all disproportionate is what I'm trying to say. Even if you calculate in poverty, location, whatever it is, overwhelmingly, you're going to have people of color being killed. So I say there's two issues. One is perception about the risk of working with people of color. And then second is it's simply firearms training and being skillful enough to know when and to have the opportunity to utilize a weapon properly. If you don't know how to use your gun and the best you can do is just draw it out and start blasting away and you don't know how to use your front sight, well, you get what you get. Imagine somebody gets shot in front of your car by the police. Imagine the bullet holes if 73% of the shots of 20 shots fired hit you. And been joined by Deborah and hey guys, Mel, Isa, Paul. Hey guys. So I think that by the way, I think what I should say, I announced in the beginning, I should announce some other stuff before because I'll wrap up and forget completely. There's no reason I can't do a commercial for Ken Goldberg's Law and Disorder, Ken Goldberg Attorney, Ken Goldberg's blog. Wow, sounds like I'm either a busy guy or a egomaniac. So my daughter is instructing me to try to get more and more people to like Ken Goldberg's Law and Disorder Facebook page and Ken Goldberg's Law and Disorder YouTube channel. I can't monitor all and see who's there, but I have figured out how to monitor the 2 Facebook pages. She hopes some future date to monetize the YouTube channel. So she's been adamant that I push people in that direction. Okay. And normally this would be broadcast on AJ's. AJ's friends with everybody. She's got over 2,000 friends I tend not to be friends with everybody in real life or in social media. So, okay. So we've got a website, www.law-disorder.com. That's the original website. It's been updated by my daughter. I don't even know how to use it, but I believe she's loading media, like my old TV shows that I did and stuff. Slowly but surely, she's putting them on there so people can watch me being interviewed in 1979. I was interviewed about 5 times in the Chicago media. And then later on, when I was at DFW Gun Range, I was interviewed and it aired. And she's got those that she'll be downloading also. So those are some places you can look for stuff. And then, I've got a blog on WordPress. And I really have tried not to write often, but to write well. And that's challenging. I was exchanging with this woman, Louise, earlier today. No, it was Beth, I think. Anyways, here was the exchange. Something effective. Oh, you write so well. Me. Well, that's pretty weird because they never said that in school where you're supposed to be improving your writing skills, for instance. I never got any positive feedback. And I went on to tell Beth that, in fact, I got so much negative feedback about some things that it pretty much damaged me. For instance, when they told me I couldn't sing, and so they made me lip sync when I was in the Glee Club. I was the only one at that time they were making lip sync. So I was told I couldn't sing, and so I didn't. I didn't, except if nobody was around to hear. Then my 7th grade art project, when I turned it in, and the art teacher said, "Well, that's the biggest mess I've ever seen." Months later, when I turned in my next art project, she said, "That's the second biggest mess I've ever seen." And so I didn't really undertake to do art either. Not that I wanted to, by the way, it wasn't a keen interest of mine. And they probably were the biggest messes she had ever seen. I wouldn't dispute that. I'd just say that she could have been a little kinder and gentler and maybe a little encouraging somehow, like, well, that's not very good, Ken, but why don't we talk about why this is a mess? Anyway, so I had never had encouragement for writing. So I've taken up this blogging thing, and it's challenging because I do what I did in law school in legal writing class. I write it, and then I edit it, and then I edit it, and then I edit it until I'm nauseous. And Radine says, "Cannot hear me." Somebody must be able to hear me, I hope. Wow, that would be a tragic thing. Radine, I hope you can hear me eventually. So, what was I saying? I got distracted because I'm like, if I'm talking and nobody can hear me, that would be completely effed up, right? Anyways, so I edit, and then I finally publish. So the 3rd year of law school, the 3rd semester of law school, a teacher told me that he gave me a C. And I had turned in a paper that I had edited. I had done 6 or 7 drafts of. I mean, it brought me to the verge of tears. I was working so damn hard in law school. So the teacher said to me, I talked to him. It was what they call an adjunct professor. It wasn't a full-time job. He said, I just don't write, legal writing. He said, you got verbal skills, which a lot of your classmates don't have. And so I became a trial lawyer, and that is what I do well. I present oral arguments, verbal arguments, but you can't do that in a blog. Blog is a written tool. So I've been writing and publishing for a couple of years in this blog, and then they give you stats, so you spend 2 hours writing a couple of paragraphs and you put it in there, and then 5 people read it and you go, yeah, I don't think this is worth it. And then one day you hit and, 40 people read the thing and you're like, oh, well, I was worth it, right? So I have this blog. It's on WordPress. It's also Law and Disorder. No Ken Goldberg, just Law and Disorder. And then, so I think I've told you all place to find me. I'm practicing law, by the way, successfully or unsuccessfully. Uh, Different. Thought it was just me. Yeah. And so I think some days it feels like I have one client, one disputed divorce. And just sometimes it just feels like I don't have time for my other clients because these two are at each other's throats in one way, shape, form, or another. It's an interesting thing. I haven't done a lot of contested divorces for a while. Did a lot of them when I was younger, and so I'm practicing law. I'm doing apparently I'm doing divorces, a number of them, and I'm also doing wills and estates and stuff. So that's a little about me in the moment. Thank you for saying you can hear me. Hopefully, others can hear me too. Um, and I'm not allowed to touch the laptop to see what's going on because AJ said the 1 week that I was doing that, I was screwing everything up. So stop that, right? Buddha. Okay. I don't know if anybody's listening. I don't know if this will work. And I don't have anybody to sit here. I probably should have waited until I had somebody here to show you my meditation area. Could be a disaster. Could be a disaster, but you know what? I'm by myself. And so I can't talk incessantly the entire time, right? So I'm going to get up and try. I'm going to try this. And try to turn the camera around and show you my meditation area as a really nice place in my home. I like it. I hope you like it. And then maybe I'll even spin 360 and show you my bicycle. My bicycle is in the living room, yes. That is like an altar kind of thing, a Buddhist altar. I'll leave it there for a second because there's a lot going on there. And I spent some time putting that together, and I can sit in front of it and I can meditate or chant if I wish. Um, you know, it's this kind of thing. There's one of the cats. I don't know if you can see him. There's my bicycle. And I think this is where I am. Oh, God. So I didn't put it back right where it was. I don't know. So now I want to talk about one other thing, and then I may just blow out of here. Um, I've been watching the news today. CNN, MSNBC. Sometimes I flip Fox. It doesn't matter. Uh, this is not so much a political partisan issue, but it's a politics. So there are these relatively new Muslim legislators in Congress now. And two of them seem to have gotten caught up over the subject of Israel primarily. And they made statements about American politicians being in the pocket of Israeli lobbyists. Well, there are lobbyists, especially who protect the interest of Israel to the best of their ability, and Jews generally, Israel, or maybe it's Jews particularly, Israel generally. No, I don't think so. So these people are being, with a broad stroke, called anti-Semites. And so, as a Jewish person, I have gone on record as saying, excuse me, there's a lot of Jews in the United States that have some issues, the same issues that these Muslim legislators are bringing up about actions being taken by Israel, the government of Israel, and about the fact that um, we do tend to support Israel even when they're doing stupid stuff, bad stuff. You know, it's cool to support people, but we're screwing up all over. You know, we're buddying up with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had 13 Saudi Arabians, you know, blew up the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. Um, you know, we don't, our moral compass is not to be discerned. Our patriotism, our pro or anti-Semitic, is not based upon your love or lack of love for a government. When Colin Kaepernick takes a knee or anybody protests the American government, they are shellacked as being unpatriotic, which would make me unpatriotic. I went to see Vice yesterday. It's about Dick Cheney and the war in Iraq. And it's real damning about the war in Iraq. It's about Dick Cheney, but the war in Iraq was a centerpiece. And I think, you know, I remember being on the air before we invaded Iraq. I remember saying, we're wrong. They're lying to us. We got no business. I said, and people were calling in. They're calling in my radio show and saying, how can you not support our invasion of Iraq? They're terrorists there. This radio show, I mean, there were CIA studies that came out before our attack in Iraq that said Iraq was not a hostile country in the sense that it was harboring terrorist activities because Saddam Hussein had messed with the first George Bush and we had bombed them. And he's like, yo. So he wasn't doing anything. He was messing with his own people, but that wasn't it. We went in and said he had weapons of mass destruction. He was using gas. He was doing all these horrible things. And in this movie, they talk about the fact that Dick Cheney, Vice President of the United States and former CEO of Halliburton, was really interested in the oil. And he had kind of divided up the country with American oil interest. So I felt I had to say something, and I feel like I have to say something now about what happens when people attack a government because of for moral reasons, not out of what I would call any lack of patriotism whatsoever. I condemned the American government, the U.S. government, back before they ever attacked Iraq. Um, I didn't condemn them when they went into Afghanistan just before that to attack the Taliban, but I did. And I also condemned their disbanding the Iraqi army, which we now know was the formulating moment for ISIS. All these armed young men, jobless, and they were ideologically drawn into a movement which we now call ISIS. So I'm just defending just because a Muslim says something that is anti-Israeli does not in and of itself make themselves an anti-Semite. They may be anti-Semites, but they're being accused of being anti-Semitic because they said that too many Congress people are in the pockets of the Israeli lobby. Now, I would have to retort that too many congressmen are in the pockets of too many everything, big business. Where there's money, there seems to be a congressman. This kid, Cory Booker, I call him a kid. He wants to run for president. You know, he voted against opening up drugs from Canada. He was getting money from Big Pharma. Now he's proposing to legalize marijuana. And I'm wondering, do his Big Pharma masters know about that? Or in the alternative, is he just doing that kind of to push aside the issue that he supported a big pharmaceutical issue? He was down on their side. You know, they don't want us to buy from Canada. It's smokescreen. Because if he wants to run, it's going to be an issue. So he can say, well, you know, I'm not in the pocket of Big Pharma. But he could be proposing at this point, mostly because he knows it's not passing. This Congress is just tone deaf and is not going to legalize marijuana anytime soon. If this country was just, we'd have legalized marijuana a long time ago, and we would have many empty seats in the prison, which would drive the prison industry insane. So, yes, what do you think about the officer who got shot by a man who thought his house was getting robbed? Would he be charged, and does it depend on state laws? Good topic. Goes back to where we started the show. I've said what I have to say about Israel, Jews, Muslims. Um, so what happened was four officers went to a house in Texas, as I recall. Um, I believe they had a warrant. Knock on the door. They go in. It's nighttime, bedtime. They got flashlights. Homeowner shoots at the person holding the flashlight and hits above the vest, kills a officer of a number of years. And so what happens to this guy? Well, he's in his home, and so I suspect that charging him would be difficult and probably not appropriate. Um, he survived. The homeowner survives. The other three officers survive. It is perilous to enter anybody's home, and you can't legislate that away. You can't legislate. I mean, I have read so many incidents in England where the homeowner gets charged with defending themselves, and I can't get behind that. I'm behind universal background checks for gun owners. I'm behind not letting mentally ill people have guns. I'm not there to say that we can't have guns and if somebody comes in the house, because I am going to be consistent. When I was on the air in the 2000s, the early 2000s, I said this before. I will say it again. This is not apples and apples, but it's close. I made the statement after numerous what they call SWAT entries were done in Texas. I said the following: if you come to my house and your face is covered, because it's not uncommon for these entry teams to cover their face. I have asked why. All I've gotten is protect their identity. And so I said, a police officer should not need to protect his identity. The exception is an undercover officer. And we know that when an undercover officer has identified, say, the location or person, they're not the person to go in. You send in a tactical team to make the arrest. The officer who's working undercover shouldn't be in there. So why are the tactical team members covering their faces? You can't see. So they say, well, we're wearing identification. I mean, says police, says FBI. And I said, says target to me. I'm pro law enforcement in many regards, but if you come to my home, anybody come to my home wearing a mask and making entry into my home when I have not invited you, is unauthorized by me, well, we just have to see what happens. Because I don't believe that, and I had this discussion on the air a lot. Police officers calling in and saying, well, I might want to protect my identity. Well, then all cops should wear masks. And they shouldn't have a name tag. They shouldn't have an identifying number on them. That's stupid. I see no reason, and I'm a pretty bright guy. I can find no reason why an officer needs to wear a face mask. If you're using gas, you might have to use a gas mask initially, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about kicking the door in, face covered, ninja wearing costumes, and going in with tactical equipment like AR-15s and land up hurting people. So the worst case that I recall was Atlanta, Georgia, a woman who was over the age of 80, and a informant told the police that marijuana was being sold from that house. So they went in the middle of the night, late. They kicked in her door. They weren't in uniform. She shot at them. She was over 80 years old. She shot at officers making entry. They're yelling and banging, and she shot and they killed her. She wasn't selling drugs. It wasn't the right residence either. I don't remember now if the confidential informant gave them the wrong information, or they went to the wrong place. They ended up killing a woman who wasn't doing anything. So they need to they need to be cautious about this whole. If you're going to go in at night, there is an element of danger that doesn't necessarily exist in the daytime. So don't go at night. That should be only under the most unusual circumstances. And when I went to, what was it? Wasn't Gunsight, Thunder Ranch. When I went to Thunder Ranch, Clint Smith, who was the primary instructor there, had been a tactical officer, and he used to train us that a tactical entry into the average household would require 36 officers to be safely entering. What do we mean by it? And it's funny because I was just watching not Vice, but something else just before that. I saw two movies yesterday. So kill me, okay? Anyways, uh, or I was watching TV. So and four officers decided to go into this warehouse and look for the bad guys, kind of get their asses handed to them. But he said it takes 36 officers. And by that, he then went on to describe when you look at the angles of the average home, and everybody's got some kind of home, even an apartment. He said, first off, you have to be able to identify every possible angle. And then as you get past whatever that is, you get past the closet, you've checked it. It's clear in order to keep it secure so that somebody can't, you have to leave somebody. So he said to clear the average resident would take 36 trained officers. You don't see that. Recently, there was a video of a police officer shooting a woman police officer in the back as they were making an entry into a residence. Uh, he wounded her. She survived. But I made the comment, you don't go in with your firearm up. I was trained in tactical firearms. When you enter, your firearm is always at the low ready. And the instructor said, better to shoot a foot or a floor than a head or a ceiling. So we've known this for well over 20 years and more as far as tactical training. So why was this officer just recently making a tactical entry right behind another officer with his gun up to the point where when it discharged accidentally in the heat of the moment, he shot the police officer in front of him. Could have killed her easily. So training. So now I'm just saying, you come to my house, please have your badge out, your face exposed. We'll all get along fine. Don't be wearing no Halloween mask on me. I just can't go there. And I'm not a badass. I'm not a one percenter. I'm not a gangbanger. I'm not a drug dealer. I'm just a private citizen who thinks that police officers ought to conduct themselves by a certain protocol. And we as citizens, shoot, we should be conforming to a certain protocol. I would have clients who would fight with police. And here was the issue. Police making an entry into their home illegally. They didn't have a warrant. They said, oh, we chased somebody in. It was always bull, okay? It was what you call pretext. And they'd run in a house. And so I had clients who fought back. Of course, they lost. Eventually, Chicago police always will numerically prevail. It's just a matter of, I need backup. So you're going to lose. And I would try to explain to my clients, who are usually, rough around the edges, you can't undertake. The public policy is that when an officer does wrong, you should comply and correct the situation later on when it is safer. That when you just take it upon yourself to fight with a police officer instead of complying with him. Now, if the officer's beating on you, the law says if somebody is illegally attacking you, police officer, whatnot, you can defend yourself. Doesn't work, but I'm just saying legally. But if the officer has entered your home illegally, and we're not talking about, I don't know what it is, shoot, bang, bang. We're talking police officers. Yeah, hey, you don't belong in here. Yeah, well, I found. So you start fighting. No good. So I would tell my clients, no, man, you're not supposed to fight with the cop. You were supposed to wait. Call me when you got to jail. Tell me you need my help. Tell me what the officers did. Let me deal with it. But there's a lot of things I could do. One is to suppress any evidence that came out. The other thing is to sue the police department for their illegal actions. Much harder than it sounds. Okay. Where did I leave? Oh, 6:59. Hell, people are going to be going away any second. Okay. So, and unfortunately, thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. I'm getting all the compliments for this shirt. Craig's complimenting his shirt. John, these are my homeboys from the south side of Chicago, so they recognize this, the African undertone to this or overtone to this. Sebastian just joined us. He's overseas. I note that because somebody earlier today, a friend of mine, Ferg, saw my biography and saw that I went to the Executive Protection Institute in Virginia, West Virginia. I spent a week training as a bodyguard, learning to drive, learning to shoot, learning to drive while you're shooting, learning lots of skills. Sebastian was a fellow student of mine, and now he's living overseas, and I may never see him again. But hey, so let me wrap it up. I suggest if you just tuned in, you're late, please watch the video is going to be posted, and I would enjoy knowing that I communicated something of substance. I do know the law. I do know firearms. I'm not so hot on other things. Buddhism, I teach meditation every Wednesday night on Stoltz Road, 8484 Stoltz Road at the Buddhist Center of Dallas. But I'm still a rookie in that regard. When it comes to things like courtrooms, firearms, I'm not a rookie anymore. I'm past that test. I'm a seasoned guy. So thanks for tuning in. AJ, I wish to hell you had been here. That's the second set of headsets we broke. So Buddha and I say namaste to AJ, and to the rest of you, I really appreciate that you tuned in, and I'm going to tune out. Peace, brother and sister.